Bolivia's movement towards socialism has warned of the possibility of a second coup ahead of the upcoming October 18th general election. Demonstrators gathered near the United States Supreme Court this Monday to oppose the confirmation of Conservative nominee Judge Amy Coney Barret. United Nations officials have called on Armenian and Azerbaijani authorities to fulfill the agreements reached in Moscow on a humanitarian ceasefire in the disputed Nagorno-Karabakh region. From the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm Katrina Goss. Bolivia's movement towards socialism has warned of the possibility of a second coup committed in complicity with national and international organizations ahead of the upcoming October 18th general election. The movement towards socialism spokesperson Marianela Pago warned of plots to tamper with the election results in order to prevent M.A.S candidates Luis Arce and David Choquehuanca from winning the elections. She noted the possibilities of a lack of transparency in the vote counting by the Supreme Electoral Tribunal, while highlighting the appointment of electoral observers from the Organization of American States, which played a significant role in promoting last year's coup, as well as the planned announcement of a curfew and the custody of the electoral results by military and police forces that participated in the coup. She also warned of human rights violations, among them the right to peaceful protest, to be committed before and after the election day, with the imposition of a 6-day state of exception. And a network of intellectuals, artists and social movements in defense of humanity has called upon democratic forces worldwide, and particularly in Latin America and the Caribbean, to monitor the events in Bolivia in the lead-up to the October 18th general election. The situation in the lead-up to the election is at an extremely difficult and sensitive moment as a result of the threats issued by officials of the de facto regime who have openly called for the use of state and paramilitary violence against social movements, the Movement Towards Socialism Party, and presidential and vice presidential candidates Luis Arce and David Choquehuanca, who according to all polls are set to win. The network of intellectuals, artists and social movements in defense of humanity denounced the de facto government's dictatorial intentions and called for nothing to interrupt Bolivia's return to democracy, which is the desire of the vast majority of Bolivians. Representatives of indigenous communities in Bolivia commemorated the Day of Decolonization this Monday, which was declared by former President Evo Morales as a tribute to resistance movements and the fight against colonization in the country. Our correspondent Camila Escalante brings us the details.
I'm in a town called Chayapata. You're going to see a lot of movement around me because candidates Luis Arce Catacora and David Choquehuanca are just arriving here to this massive rally. Today, of course, is the day that the plurinational state of Bolivia celebrates the Day of Decolonization, which was really important to Evo Morales, who declared the day in 2011 by Supreme Decree. It's important for Bolivia in remembering the hard resistance of the indigenous peoples against the European invasion and the fight to protect the homeland and its resources against imperialism and colonialism continues today here in Bolivia and around our continent. Evo in particular emphasized the fight for dignity and the fight to protect Bolivia's indigenous peoples and natural resources, something that is articulated only within the movement towards socialism on a large scale. No other party represents the same perspective or maintains the demand for sovereignty.
Thank you, Camila. The national leader of Venezuela's Darío Rivas Electoral Campaign Command, Jorge Rodríguez, assured that it is a priority for the candidates of the Great Patriotic Pole to debate the effects of the U.S. blockade, promoted by right-wing sectors, with the population. He recalled that the blockade against Venezuela is cruel and has caused damages even for middle-class sectors, while extremist sectors of the opposition have turned it into a business, getting rich off the back of the U.S. attacks on the legitimate Venezuelan government. Rodriguez added that it is essential that everybody is aware of this reality prior to the parliamentary elections to be held in December. He stressed the cruelty of a policy that leaves diabetic patients without insulin or patients with kidney failure without dialysis. He also pointed out that the truth must be shown to those who over the last 8 months have worked to fight the COVID-19 pandemic, who must be compared to those who have simultaneously promoted the theft of Venezuela's assets abroad and even called for foreign intervention. The Director General of the World Health Organization has warned against the idea that herd immunity is a realistic strategy to stop the pandemic, describing such proposals as unethical.
we're now seeing an increase in the number of reported cases of COVID-19, especially in Europe and the Americas. Each of the last 4 days has been the highest number of cases reported so far. Many cities and countries are also reporting an increase in hospitalizations and intensive care bed occupancy. There has been some discussion recently about the concept of reaching so-called herd immunity by letting the virus spread. Herd immunity is a concept used for vaccination, in which a population can be protected from a certain virus if a threshold of vaccination is reached. Herd immunity is achieved by protecting people from a virus, not by exposing them to it. Never in the history of public health has herd immunity been used as a strategy for responding to an outbreak, let alone a pandemic. It's scientifically and ethically problematic.
This Monday saw the start of the 28th Assembly of Caribbean People, during which the organisation will ratify the defence of the sovereignty of its territories in the face of the interventionist policies of the United States. The organisation, composed of Caribbean social and political movements, held a virtual press conference to condemn US intervention in the region. During the event, the Assembly was set to analyse the US elections and their possible repercussions on the peoples of the Caribbean. Participants also plan to ratify the defence of sovereignty and the right to self-determination in the face of any administration that seeks to dictate policies in the region. The Assembly of Caribbean People was founded in 1994 at a Caribbean meeting hosted at the Oilfields Workers Trade Union in Trinidad and Tobago, and is a forum that seeks to foster dialogue and debate towards a people's agenda for Caribbean integration, solidarity, sovereignty and welfare. Demonstrators gathered near the United States Supreme Court building in Washington, D.C. this Monday to oppose conservative Supreme Court nominee Judge Amy Coney Barret, who began her confirmation hearing by a deeply divided Senate Judiciary Committee. Judge Amy Coney Barret was nominated by President Donald Trump to fill the seat of the late liberal Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, known for her support for women's rights, who passed away on September 18th. The 48-year-old conservative and Catholic Judge Barrett is known for her opposition to abortion and same-sex marriage, while her confirmation would shift the balance on the Supreme Court significantly right. Her nomination is considered a political strategy of President Trump and Republicans who want her on the bench in time for the presidential elections on November 3rd. Meanwhile, the Democrats and their presidential candidate Joe Biden have demanded that the nomination for the empty Supreme Court seat be addressed after the election. A group of protesters opposed to Judge Barrett's confirmation chanted, "Let the people decide," while another group in support of Judge Barrett's confirmation also gathered.
We feel that the election is already beginning and that it should not be rammed in, this nomination should not be rammed in a few weeks before the election for president.
Whoever serves on the Supreme Court is not going to affect me that much, but it's going to affect my children, my grandchildren, and all young people in our country are going to live with the consequences of Amy Coney Barrett getting confirmed for the rest of their lives. Trump has no mandate to appoint 3 extremists to the Supreme Court. He lost the popular vote by 2.87 million votes. So this is the minority imposing their views on the majority, and it's fundamentally undemocratic, and it must stop.
We realize there's an election upon us, but we have time to do this, and it's important to have somebody in a full court, and so we're glad that they're moving forward.
I am dressed up as a Justice for Life. We are here to support Amy Coney Barrett as the Supreme Court nomination. We are the pro-life gen, and so we are so excited to have somebody who we know will protect life in law.
And we now go to the United States, where our collaborator Abby Martin has the latest details on the current situation in the lead-up to the November 3rd presidential elections.
Martin with your weekly election update for TeleSUR English. For as long as I've been voting, progressives have been lectured about the need to engage in the politics of lesser evilism. As the years went by, the candidates got worse and worse. Where now, in 2020, we are faced with the choice between 2 of the oldest nominees in U.S. history, Joe Biden, objectively a center-right political insider, and Donald Trump, a far-right extremist and reality star extraordinaire. The last 4 years have been surreal and incredibly dystopian, but this year takes the cake as one of the craziest. Let's just zoom in on the last month in election news. 3 weeks ago, Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away, culminating in the moment liberals have been scolding us about. See, for 2 decades or so, a gun has been pointed to the heads of progressives, telling us that this election, like every election, will come down to a woman's right to choose. They say, if we allow the Republicans to take control of the courts, Roe v. Wade will be overturned, setting us back an entire generation of progress. And in fact, that very scenario is unfolding right before our eyes, with Amy Coney Barret, an anti-choice religious cultist, being pushed through by Trump right before the election. When actually faced with a fight to stop the extremists from seizing the highest court in the land, the Democrats just roll over. The so-called resistance party should be laying their bodies on the line to prevent this handmaiden lady from being appointed. All of a sudden, it's no longer an election issue. Instead of using their leverage, like, I don't know, trying to shut down the government or promising to pack the court, Democrats have simply given up and are just hoping for the best. I guess it's no surprise considering Trump has already appointed a record number of lifetime federal judges, more than any other president at this point, and Democrats vote to confirm them 40% of the time. 2 weeks ago, Trump held a Rose Garden ceremony to celebrate his third SCOTUS nominee. And in the throngs of a global pandemic, sat people like sardines on top of each other, barely any wearing masks. Turns out a dozen or so people from the event became infected with COVID-19, including Donald Trump himself. And the next week was wild with media speculation, everyone uncertain if Trump, a 74-year-old who lives on McDonald's and Diet Coke, was at death's door. He served a brief stint in the hospital before making a cinematic return to the White House, visibly gasping for air like a goldfish out of a bowl. But don't you dare wish him ill. Only thoughts and prayers, please, for a speedy recovery for the cartoon authoritarian at the helm of U.S. empire. The same person who wishes harm on his political enemies and threatens constant violence on the left with every utterance deserves nothing but our respect, guys. After the Democrats prayed him back to good health, he took to Twitter to downplay the virus and brag about his top-tier medical treatment, while tens of millions of Americans live in fear of getting sick because they have no health insurance. The election has now reached peak absurdity, with Trump running on the idea that he is immune to COVID-19, that it's nothing to worry about, that his catastrophic inaction is justified. You would think it would be a cakewalk to run against this man. All Biden needs to do is put a plan in effect to deal with the pandemic and give some semblance of relief to everyone suffering economically. But Biden is such a terrible candidate that his victory is far from certain. His entire campaign has been that he's not Trump, touting support from conservatives while slamming Bernie's base at every turn. The first debate between them was a hot mess, too, with Trump dominating every second with an endless string of lies, while Biden stammered his way through, trying to make a point. He couldn't even combat Trump's non-answer on the horrendous handling of the pandemic or the issue of election integrity. 215,000 Americans dead, and an economic crisis should have been a slam dunk for the Biden camp. And now, still plagued with a highly infectious disease, Trump is refusing to debate unless he can infect Joe Biden in person. So as of now, the next debate is canceled. Polls are neck and neck in battleground states, but things could still take a dramatic turn as COVID continues to ravage the White House and the president.
Thank you, Abby. Beijing on Monday rejected Canada's claims regarding 2 of its citizens who are detained in China and announced Canada's arrest of Huawei executive Meng Wanzhou as arbitrary detention.
Michael Kubrick and Michael Spavor are suspected of activities endangering China's national security. China's judicial organs are independently handling their cases, and as a result, the accusation of arbitrary detention cannot be pinned on China. What Canada has done to Meng Wanzhou is arbitrary detention. Canada's attempts to form international cliques to put pressure on China together are totally futile and counterproductive. Canada should give up its double standards and fully respect China's judicial sovereignty and stop releasing irresponsible remarks.
British Prime Minister Boris Johnson announced a new national alert system set to classify medium, high or very high COVID-19 risk areas in the country, while claiming that it was designed to simplify and standardise a confusing patchwork of local rules. Meanwhile, health authorities have noted that the COVID-19 death toll is on the rise, having already reported the highest figure in Europe at almost 43,000.
The number of cases has quadrupled in the last 3 weeks. There are now more people in hospital with COVID than when we went into lockdown on March the 23rd, and deaths are already rising. And of course, the very high alert level will apply where transmission rates are rising most rapidly and where the NHS could soon be under unbearable pressure without further restrictions. In these areas, the government will set a baseline of prohibiting social mixing indoors and in private gardens and, I'm sorry to say, closing pubs and bars.
United Nations officials have called on Armenian and Azerbaijani authorities to fulfill the agreements reached in Moscow on a humanitarian ceasefire in the disputed Nagorno-Karabakh region, following reports of new clashes in the area on Monday.
And today I can tell you that we are very disappointed to receive reports of ceasefire violations from the region and consider such violations unacceptable. The Secretary General condemns any targeting and attacks against civilian populated areas anywhere and regrets the loss of life and injuries. The Secretary General again reminds the parties of their obligations under international humanitarian law to protect civilians and civilian infrastructure and to refrain from any action that could also risk widening the fighting beyond the immediate zone. We also stress that we call on all parties again to fulfill their agreements to a humanitarian ceasefire and other commitments announced in Moscow. We also share the High Commissioner's for Human Rights' alarm at the suffering of civilians. Announced over the weekend.
Turkish authorities reiterated the country's jurisdiction to conduct scientific and technical studies in the Aegean and Eastern Mediterranean seas, as research operations were set to resume in the disputed waters, sparking criticism from Greece.
We have jurisdiction in the Aegean and the Mediterranean. We have jurisdiction that was recorded by the UN. We carry out scientific and technical studies in these areas under our jurisdiction. This is not a threat to anyone. They are attacking these scientific and technical studies we do. Other Grace continues its planned and scheduled activities as it has been within the framework of the works he has done so far. Our work here will continue within this plan, and as the naval forces, we will provide our research ships the necessary support and protection.
On Monday, Jordan's King Abdullah II swore in a new Prime Minister and Cabinet, which faced the task of leading the country through an economic and health crisis as it faces a growing wave of coronavirus infections. The King appointed Bisha al-Qassani as the new Prime Minister, who has held a number of cabinet posts in the past and served as an advisor to the King. The new cabinet consists of 31 ministers, and more than half of them have served in previous cabinets. Jordan has suffered an economic crisis in recent years, including domestic challenges such as high unemployment, poverty and corruption. Meanwhile, the COVID-19 infection rate has skyrocketed since the lifting of the lockdown. The new Prime Minister vowed to address the coronavirus epidemic by balancing citizens' health with the sustainability of work and production activities to reduce the impacts on the national economy. The lifting of an international embargo on October 18th, allowing Iran to buy and sell military hardware, will be remembered as the day of US defeat, the Iranian Foreign Ministry announced on Monday. According to a ministry spokesman, the move was also declared a victory over Washington's delirious sanctions. He argued that the US became too reliant on economic warfare to pursue its foreign policy agenda, and as a result eroded the effectiveness of such restrictions. The official noted that the sanctions prompted Iran to develop foreign trade that was free of US interference. Earlier this month, the US Treasury Department announced the blacklisting of 18 major Iranian banks in a new attempt to exclude the country from the global financial system. Tehran condemned the move as economic terrorism. The Syrian Ministry of Health reported 45 new COVID-19 patients on Monday, bringing the total number of confirmed cases to over 4,700. According to authorities, 1,200 people have recovered from the virus. The country maintains its borders closed, as well as restrictions at workplaces, commercial centres, service centres and religious institutions, while travel between different provinces is limited. The prevention measures also continue at all teaching levels, and the Ministry of Education has urged the population to respect the established regulations. Mass cultural gatherings and sporting events are also banned. Schools reopened in the Democratic Republic of Congo on Monday after over 6 months of closure due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Meanwhile, health authorities have confirmed over 10,000 COVID-19 cases and 276 fatalities since the outbreak of the epidemic in the country.
We parents are happy even if we don't have any money. We try to pay for school's meals and the deposit, as they ask for the children to start the studies.
The children stay at home for 7 months. Today they are happy to go back to school. For us, the parents too. It's important because the children have to study despite the pandemic.
This year is going to be like any other year, but the teacher of each class knows that there is a delay in the program. We will try to review with revisions.
And we've come to the end of this news brief, but remember you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Katrina Goss, and thank you for watching.